Hello my quilting friends! My name is Leah Day and welcome back to the Leaf Peepers Quilt Along. Today we're piecing our last block for this quilt. It's this red, orange, and purple block that's going to finish off our quilt beautifully. So let's get started figuring out all the pieces we're going to need, getting a nice layout, and then we're going to jump on the machine and piece this last block together. So here is our last block. This beautiful red, purple, and orange leaf. And this is, again, a lot of tiny little pieces to put together. And you might be wondering how to lay this out accurately, how to get everything in the right position. And my biggest tip is to get everything lined up vertically. So really pay attention to what comes in what order vertically, and don't pay so much attention to how things are lining up horizontally, because of course with seam allowance that's going to change as you piece things together. So don't worry about that quite so much. I think it's a lot easier to focus on these blocks always in those vertical rows. Okay, so once I get it all laid out and I'm sure it's correct, double and triple check yourself that it's all correct, then we're going to take the pieces and start flipping them over and clipping them together. So I'm just taking this next piece, I flip it over and put a little mini clip right there. Then I open that out, grab the next piece, and I just go straight up, flip it over, line up those edges, and it's just my system to clip running perpendicular to the seam I'm going to stitch. Now you might have a different system, use whatever works well for you, but the key here is to know when you get to your machine and not get confused and turn around and accidentally piece something. Like if you piece that edge together, it would obviously be wrong. It would no longer work. So you just go one piece at a time, flip it over, and this is right sides together always. Clip it on, open it out, grab the next piece, flip it over, and clip it on. So that's how I'm going to line up all of my rows and clip them together. I'll meet you at the machine when we're ready to start piecing. So I always like to run through a little review just to get you started on the right foot with quilt piecing. I have my stitch length here. I'm just doing a straight stitch and I've set it to 1.5 millimeters. I have a patchwork foot here that gives me a nice 1/4 inch, and I have my needle set, so it's going to end in the down position. Now stitch through a little scrap here. That's a charger. What that does is just in case your machine has not been threaded properly or it gags, that's going to go on that scrap. This also reduces your bobbin thread waste. So that's why I stitched through that first, and then it's like chain piecing everything else together. I can just slip it right up against the needle. I can take a stitch or two off of it and then slide the pieces right up against the needle, and it makes it a lot easier. Okay, so now I'm going to take a look at my row, and I know I need to piece this seam first, but I could piece this like this. You know, I could stitch it through the machine starting here, but I really like to flip it over and look for the edge that has seam allowance, and that's right here. So I'm going to unclip it, and I'm lining up these pieces. When I do the clipping action, I'm really not lining up. I'm not taking my time to line up the pieces accurately. I'm not getting them stacked up just exactly on top of one another. So I do that right at the machine right before I stitch through those pieces. So there we go. Nicely lined up and looking great. Now I'm going to reach back and lift the foot slightly and push the pieces right up against my needle. This is kind of putting it in jail. So the very next stitch that you take is right onto those fabrics. And then just I'm finger pressing here, holding that firmly as I stitch on down. And I apologize if it's gotten loud. It just suddenly started storming while I'm in the crafty cottage, so that might be what you're hearing. Okay, so I stitched through my scrap charger again, clip that off, bring it around to the front, clip off the original one. That looks great. Now I'll move to the next piece. And this one, I'm going to flip over again, so that way I'm leading with the seam allowance. I guess that's the best way of saying it, leading with the seam allowance. So that way you're stitching through the bulkiest thing first. Okay, so here again, I'm lining things up nicely, making sure this bottom edge is lined up, making sure the sides are lined up all the way down the length. And it really does help to take this little bit of time to do this because if you get started on the right foot, the whole thing's going to be so much easier. There we go. Slide the pieces under the foot and start stitching. So that's how I'm going to piece all of the units together. I'll meet you back here when we're ready to start piecing the rows together. So I've pieced all of my rows together and pressed all of the seam allowances open. And I feel like I can get away with that because I lower my stitch length to 1.5 millimeters before I start piecing. And that ensures all of the pieces are locked together really securely. Okay, so now we're going to start piecing the rows together. And to do this, I just flip over one row on top of another. And I'm going to match up and pen where we have colors coming together. So this orange matching to orange and where that red comes together too. Because those are the areas that are going to be really noticeable if they don't match up perfectly. So here's what I do. I stack up, make sure those edges are in nice alignment, then pull back on that top fabric and make sure those seams are just stacked up perfectly on top of one another, and then place a pen running through those fabrics. And it really helps to have nice thin pens. I like these short ones with glass heads. That's my favorite. Okay, so now I'll come down the line and pen this seam just the exact same way. So make sure the fabrics are lined up properly, pull back on that top fabric, stack the seams, and pen. So that's how I'm going to prep up all of my rows. I'm going to pen them together, and then I'll meet you at the machine to start sewing the rows together. So one end of this set of rows is just a long strip of fabric. We have really not a lot to match up here, so I'm going to rotate this around, and I'm actually going to start on this side because I have a pin placed right here, so I can make sure that I'm starting accurately right up to that pin. So here we go, making sure everything's lined up nicely all the way to that corner. Lift up on the presser foot, slide the pieces right underneath, right up against the needle, and begin stitching. And you want to watch out for the seams. So as I'm coming up to a seam, I just double check that. Just make sure, give it a little swipe with your finger, make sure that the seam is not folding over. There we go. Take that pin out. And then I've got a seam right here in the middle, so just make sure that's laying flat as I stitch right over it. There we go. And if ever you feel like there's a little extra baggy fabric, just give that a little tug with your finger, press down firmly, give it a little tug, and that'll ease out any extra fabric down that length. And again, double check your seam, that looks okay. Doesn't look like it's folding over. And always stop with your needle in the down position. That kind of locks it in place, so even if you're wiggling around, it's not going to slip away from your foot, and you're not going to, take the next stitch and have it be wildly inaccurate. Okay, and we got another seam here. Again, just give it a little swipe, make sure those seam allowances are staying nice and flat. And it's not the end of the world if a seam allowance flips over. If I'm feeling really obsessive about it, I'll go and rip it out and stitch that little section again. But really, that's only if you're really wanting to be obsessive compulsive. It's not really a requirement. As long as the seam is matching nicely, that's really what counts. That's really the purpose. Okay, take out that pin. You do want to take out your pens as you stitch, just simply because if you hit that just exactly right with your needle, it could potentially break your machine. It could throw the timing off, so definitely watch out for that. Okay, so now I'm sliding these edges together, and again, just kind of keeping an eye on this nice open space that I have here. If I ever feel like there's a little bit of baggy fabric in there, just kind of give it a little pull. I put a pen right here at the end, and I can just give that a little tug with my fingertips, and that eases out any excess fabric. So that way, as I come to the end, those edges are going to stay in perfect alignment all the way down. So with that seam stitched, I'm going to finger press open those seam allowances, just get them nice and flat. And finger pressing is so much better than digging at it with your iron. Like if I tried to take the tip of the iron and open that with it, it really doesn't work. And it ends up not only distorting your fabric, but also can scorch your fabric. It goes shiny. So it really helps to flatten this out with your fingertips. Get in there and, kind of dig at it a little bit. It's definitely one of those things that put a lot of fingertip pressure on my quilts. And if your fingers are brittle, if your fingernails just can't take that pressure, you could always use, the edge of a sharp tool, maybe a credit card, an old credit card, that would work too. But I just really like to get that nice and flat, and then I hit it with a hot, dry iron. I don't often use steam unless I'm doing something pretty weird. Fabric manipulation, that kind of thing. For the most part, my iron is always dry. And that just makes the iron last a little bit longer. When you put water in an iron, it just tends to wear everything out a lot faster. So there we go. Beautiful matching seams here. You can see how nicely that matches. That looks great. So that's how I'm going to piece all of the rows together for our last block. And here's what it looks like whenever I finished it. So that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed piecing the Leaf Peepers quilt with me, and you'll finish up this last block so you can get your quilt top together. I hope you'll check out Sherry's video as well. She's posting right along with me in this collaborative quilt along. You can find her video at wholecirclestudio.com. Now, if you'd like to join in the fun of the Leaf Peepers quilt along, all you need to do is pick up a copy of the quilt pattern. You can find it at leahday.com/leaf. This quilt pattern not only includes details and instructions for piecing this beautiful quilt, you've got 2 different variations. You can piece it as a wall hanging or as a long table runner. And we also include 2 different options on your quilting design. And that's what we're going to be getting into next. We're not just going to piece it, we're also going to quilt it together too. So I hope you'll join in the fun and come pick up a copy of the pattern at leahday.com/leaf. Until next time, let's go quilt.